I apologize to the listeners. My French pronunciation is appalling. So please forgive me. I will mess up many times. But Eugene Francois Vidocq?
Yes.
Chris, yes.
No, that was good. Holly.
Yay! Okay. I will mess up later on, but I will take the win now. We are joined today by Maxime Durand, who is the World Design Director at Ubisoft. Thank you for joining us, Maxime.
Thank you so much for inviting me again.
Always a pleasure. So I think we just want to kick off by talking about the actual recreation of Paris itself, because it is so impressive in the game. Replaying it and with all the crowds and so much going on, it's still pretty a technical marvel. And it was kind of highly praised when the game came out. It was as with a lot of Assassin's Creed games. I think the setting is almost the main character, and Paris really shines through. And I was just wondering, it's interesting to me that Unity is probably the closest kind of to home for Ubisoft in terms of its setting. I know Ubisoft is obviously a huge international company. You've got teams all over the place, but Paris it's where the kind of headquarters is, I think, unless I'm totally wrong.
No, you're totally right. And I couldn't agree more with you than the fact that, over 10 years later, the recreation of the city or the modeling of the city of Paris in Assassin's Creed Unity is still a masterpiece. I think it's still a trendsetter. And one of the the big changes that really affected that was global illumination. It's very technical, but the fact that light was bouncing in and out of textures. But, I'm getting ahead of myself. You're saying, so with Ubisoft being a French company, was it more burden or was it more opportunities to create a game that was located in Paris?
Yeah, I'm kind of wondering about both that kind of geographical, but also cultural and social connection. Whether this kind of closer connection was it felt during the process? How did it affect development?
I think it did. I think it helped. It added more support, but in a way also burden, and I'll develop on that. But in terms of support, of course, the interest was that museums in Paris are numerous. There are lots of guides, so it was kind of easy to get the core team at that time of development to visit these sites and speak in French for many of the team members that were there. So it was easy to get access to a lot of information. And it was easy to see the streets. Also on the technological axis, a lot of content has been digitized, where there's old pictures from the 19th century in Paris. So that really had a big impact on the development of this game. But in a way, the team was based off in Montreal, at least the core team that created Assassin's Creed Unity. And as you mentioned, it's an international company, so a lot of team members were scattered throughout the world and do not necessarily have French as their main culture. So in another way, the process was the same in the fact that what we want to do is make sure that everyone on the team understands the same thing about the project, understands the same thing about how we want to represent the past into the video game itself. And that's really true of any of the titles that we're making. But for certain people like me and other team members that are French, actually, it had a very specific impact on them. And I suppose a sense of pride also to try to represent their own history. And give a sense of their own experience if they were from Paris as well.
That's really interesting, because I was imagining, because we've spoken about kind of research trips and things like that, and I was just imagining kind of, there's people who have gone to Egypt, to Greece, and some people are just walking outside their door and going, oh, okay, here we are. But yes, as you say, it's Montreal rather than Paris for the main development team for this. And also really interesting kind of talking about digitization, which is obviously something that comes up a lot for historians and kind of access to archives and to materials. So really interesting to hear how that impacts game developers as well. I know I am eternally thankful for the archivists and digitization teams at archives.
It's something that has changed my career for certain. And I mean, if we go back 20 years ago, it would have been a very different challenge for historians to represent the past, probably more relying on books and published books and having to scan them. The fact that we have access to so many digitized formats really helps us a lot. It goes much faster. And I think museums are more and more aware that there's a value to give free of access to their collections instead of having this paywall that prevented people to reach out for their collection and basically understanding better history. And so there's this shift, I think, that has been happening in the last 10 years that has confirmed that it's more valuable for museums to inform people, even online. And people will still go to the museum even if they digitize everything, because they're two different experiences. And so, and in a way, it's the same with video games. If people are going to play a video game, they'll still go to the museum because this is totally different.
Oh, that's a really great point. And you were kind of talking a bit about kind of the development team having, connections to France or being French themselves. And I was kind of wondering if this connection, obviously it brings a benefit in that you are maybe particularly engaged, as you say, you're really proud to kind of bring this aspect of history to life. Does it also have its drawbacks in that maybe you have a lot of, I don't know, prior knowledge or potential assumptions about the time period that then becomes quite tricky when you're getting into it?
Definitely. And choosing a time period like Assassin's Creed Unity or even Assassin's Creed 3, where both are, the founding history of their country, really has a huge risk in a way, but also it's a great opportunity to highlight that time period. But what it usually means is that some people will appreciate the representation of the past, or the entertainment version of it, and some won't, and it's going to divide people. And I think we knew that when we were developing the game itself. We were aware that it's national history is very political, and how we would represent the events, the characters, all of this would be interpreted differently around people. And so there has been a big change between the making of Assassin's Creed 3 and Assassin's Creed Unity, in a way that where Assassin's Creed 3 would follow really each event of the that unfolded during the American Revolution. For Assassin's Creed Unity, most of these events were in the backdrop. So that was a huge change, and that was in a way a matter of making sure that we were not too political in our interpretation of the game. At least that was the intent.
I mean, that leads really nicely on, because I was going to ask about that, because I remember when the game came out, it's kind of such an iconic setting, and kind of one where you kind of go, oh, of course they're going to cover French Revolution. It is so iconic. Everyone has an idea what it is. It's also an incredibly complicated history. And as you say, it's one tied so tightly to national identity, and kind of whenever you get close to anything like that, it gets very emotive. People are very passionate. And so I was just wondering, how did it feel kind of navigating these lines? You're kind of saying there was a kind of more of an effort to put certain things in the backdrop rather than in the forefront.
There was at least one part of it. Well, of course, as we do with any games, we try to understand the events. We try to understand the time period a little bit more, and we try to understand the city. And of course, it's a very complex time period. There are many highs and many lows that happen in a very, very concentrated amount of time between revolutionizing civil rights, and at the same time creating a tool or using a tool that is meant to decapitate people, to make it more humane. It was a lot of information to try to understand for the team. And so I think that's why we decided that we still wanted to show the events, the people of the past, but in a way we wanted to give more room for the main character and for the fictive plot between the assassins and the Templars, because their story would still be opportunities to show various views of the past. And so let's talk about national history. France is still using the same terms acquired from the French Revolution, which are left and right, or the mountain, for instance, are terms that really were created during the French Revolution, and they're still in place today. So of course, all of this is possibly sensitive. And maybe to finish on this point, it was important for us to consult with people to understand this, to have external perspective outside of the game production, to make sure that what we were trying to achieve was actually what we were doing and designing.
Yeah, there's just so much to unpack there. And the history itself is incredibly complex. So in preparation for this podcast, I thought, I'll brush up a bit. It's not my area of expertise, but I'll brush up a bit. And was very quickly like, oh God, there's so much. I have huge respect for any historians looking at the French Revolution, because there was just so much to unpack in such a short amount of time. It made me thankful that I mainly look at the repercussions rather than what was actually happening at the time. And you were kind of talking about depictions there. And of course, as with in this game, as with any Assassin's Creed game, a big part of that is bringing these very famous historical figures to life. Kind of particularly in this game, you have Napoleon, you have Marie Antoinette. And they are figures, they're very divisive figures, as the history is itself. And they're figures that kind of have become larger than they were as people. Marie Antoinette is kind of used as a shorthand for excess, particularly feminine excess. Napoleon is kind of, depending on who you ask, a tyrant, or it is incredibly complicated. And so how do you go about making these decisions of, okay, we're going to depict them in this way, because they are described in so many different ways depending on who is describing them. They're figures that morph into whoever is looking at them. They morph into what they need to see at that time.
Well, back in the days when we did Assassin's Creed Unity, I think we were still relying on looking at main historical characters that we were aware of and trying to see how they could fit into the narrative that we were trying to build, and how they best illustrate exactly what you mentioned. For instance, if they were shorthands for iconic representations like Napoleon is. And so there's a part where we did that. We look at who the main characters, like Théroigne de Méricourt, for instance, like feminist icon. It was lovely to be able to highlight her and give her the place that she deserves in the game. But at the same time, I think it was important for us always to show that it's not all good and bad. Those people are a bit shady. Also, I mean, I think the representation of Napoleon is one example out of that. He shouldn't be there, so like there was secrecy around his first appearance in the mission in the game. Like he was basically telling you, like, I wasn't here, right?
You didn't see me.
So that's with the historical characters. But then whenever we couldn't fit the historical characters with the storyline that we wanted to create, then came in the fictive characters. The King of Beggars, for instance, is one of them. So many of these characters that we see that are associated with Templars are usually fictive, because it was, I'd say, in a way, easier, and they're less. Well, I mean, there was no record that was going to, prove us otherwise.
I mean, that's a really interesting point. I think it's one of the challenges. I think, because obviously the fiction, the lore of the game, you have kind of good versus, it's a bit complicated and things happen, but it's good versus evil at its very core, and kind of placing that narrative within history. And history is very messy. It is, very rarely does stuff fit neatly into those categories, that it becomes quite difficult. And so it's interesting saying kind of, the characters, okay, who do we make a Templar? Because that's a statement in and of itself is really interesting.
Yes, I remember that. I think that was the process that we had in mind, like probably a Templar because of this and that. But sometimes, they're so complex, as you mentioned, or we have enough information that allows for complexity. And Comte de Mirabeau is one of those very complex characters who was originally known as a main revolutionary, but ultimately, after his lifetime, it was found out that he was a traitor to the revolutionary cause, because he was still trying to find balance between the royals and this new thing that was happening, that was the revolution. But of course, at that time, they were all trying different sorts of things, and then they didn't know that abolishing the monarchy was going to be the end result at first. It was part of a complex process, for the 5 years that the revolution lasted. Were years of huge transformation and novelties and experiences. I mean, I'm going to put this in quotes, but what came out of it ultimately was something that has transformed the way that our democracies work for the last 200 years. So it has been very important.
I find it really interesting playing the game, because the game really drops you in it. It kind of doesn't over explain what's going on, and I think in a way it was a little bit overwhelming, but also showed just how complicated it is going on. Because as you say, with these, perhaps with how we learn things at school, or, you know, how we learn things just through kind of cultural memory, we have this idea of, oh, the revolution rose up kind of, you know, and this happened, when actually, as you say, the beginning of the revolution was actually kind of pretty conservative, and that, no, we don't want to get rid of the king. We just want to hold politicians accountable and all of that. And actually showing that escalation and all of that is really difficult. I kind of like that it drops you in it, because it is really messy and complicated, and it's quite a clever framing device to have the fictional characters, because it means, okay, no, we're focusing on these, but this is all going on in the background. Yeah, I enjoyed that.
Well, it brings a big question of like, what are we expecting out of these games, whether it's Assassin's Creed Unity or any of the Assassin's Creed games. As a matter of fact, like, are we expecting of them to be a historical, you know, reconstitution of the past? If so, well, it doesn't leave room for much novelty or narrative, which is, I think, what Assassin's Creed usually provides, that mix of having both a lot of historical depth and elements that makes it believable, but at the same time, what we're trying to do is basically stab people and, you know, find out what happens for our main character, and they have their own, you know, their own storyline. And I'm sure this is still true to the French Revolution, in the way that people had their own daily struggle and personal struggle, but they endured something that was common to the city, like hunger, for instance, and security. And these, I think, are still reflected in the game.
And there's lots of interesting moments, even if it isn't explicit. You know, as you play the game, you can't help but notice, you know, you start on these very lavish palaces and all this decoration, all this stuff. And then as you go through Paris, you see, you know, people rioting, people are hungry. And, you know, the game is telling you something without it sitting you down and going, okay, so at the time there was a food shortage and bread cost this much. And you pick that up while experiencing Paris. I just wanted to give a little, I guess, kind of shout out, because I really enjoyed the murder mysteries in this game. I have to say, I apologize to the listeners. My French pronunciation is appalling. So please forgive me. I will mess up many times, but Eugene Francois Vidocq?
Yes.
Chris, yes.
No, that was good.
Yay, okay. I will mess up later on, but I will take the win now. But I thought that was a really interesting example of taking this character from history and developing kind of new mechanics in the game that I thought was, I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, these murder mysteries were a way for us to integrate all of these interesting pieces of history, of facts, of characters that wouldn't necessarily fit in the main storyline. But there were so many of them. I think originally when we were working on them, we called them like 1,000 stories of Paris or something like this. Well, we weren't aiming for that, but you know, we just knew we had so many of these stories, and Vidocq is a great example out of that. I mean, for the French Revolution itself, he's irrelevant or at best, but in the French culture, let's say in the last 40 years, 50 years, he's been very popular. There have been TV shows about him. So in the mind of players, he was something, at least for French players, as this detective character, the likes of Sherlock Holmes for other cultures, for instance. So it was these murder mysteries were these opportunities to show all of these small details that we wanted to show, but again, didn't fit so well in the main storyline.
It's a great way of kind of, from a kind of narrative design perspective, kind of getting around that, in that, particularly when you have something so big and so all-encompassing, but you want to get these little kind of like, these interesting interactions and details. And so I really enjoyed them for that. It was also nice to have something not centered around, it was centered around killing, because you are solving murders rather than committing them. And so I just wanted to move on slightly and talk about the 2024 Olympic opening ceremony, because there was obviously a very recognizable character in that. For anybody who isn't aware, during the opening ceremony, there was kind of a hooded assassin-esque figure kind of parkouring across the rooftops of Paris. And it felt like a fitting reference to both the important role of video games in France, but also this kind of meeting of past and present. And I was really surprised, because I assumed that this was a collaboration, but instead you're saying it's more of an homage?
I was so in shock when I learned 2 days before the Olympics started, before the opening of the ceremony, I learned through the medias that there was going to be a documentary explaining the ceremony itself that was going to be released the day before the Olympics, right? All right, you following me? And then this is when they were saying that there was this mysterious figure that may be connected to Assassin's Creed, and that that was the official discourse from the organizers of the Olympics. And so the day before the Olympics, I did watch the documentary itself, and I was I was blown away. It was so emotional for me to see this. Like I was taking pictures of that documentary, sending these to my colleagues. That we used to work on this game together. I was like so curious to see what would happen. And then on the Friday, the day of the opening, I was just blown away by this homage. So what we know is that the maker Thomas Joly has been playing Assassin's Creed. He's a fan of the franchise, and he was really trying to merge these two worlds. The fact that video games are, at least Assassin's Creed is a French product, that are, well, I couldn't say if he was really aiming for Arno or for Altair or Ezio, if it was very personal, but all I can say is it meant so much for a lot of game makers, but I think for players as well, to see this character unraveling through the city and the skies of Paris.
I mean, I remember at the time it was I was working on something, and then I think my dad messaged me to be like, 'cause my dad is a huge fan of the Assassin's Creed series, and he messaged me to be like, opening ceremony, Holly, it's Bog. And I was like, what is it going on about? And turned it on. I was like, oh wow, that is so cool. I can't imagine. It must have been incredibly emotional for developers who worked on the series to see that.
It just shows how far video games have come. From being this very individual pastime, not so well recognized, and it feels like culturally we're slowly getting there. I mean, in terms of numbers, gamers are like they're massively represented worldwide, but in terms of culture, I think there's still a lot of work to be done to appreciate that video games are part of our lives, or accepted in the same way that, or embraced in the same way that books, movies, and other forms of arts are shown. But I think this is definitely a pivotal moment.
It was really great to me as well in that it was just there and part of it. It didn't over-explain itself. It didn't justify itself. I find something I know that I personally can find a little bit annoying sometimes in the inclusion of video games is, it's spent so long justifying why, that by the time that we do that, we run out of time or word count or whatever to just get to it. And actually, it's great just to have it there, and it doesn't need to justify itself because it justifies itself by existing.
You're so right. It felt natural. I mean, I've watched the whole ceremony at least twice, so it just felt so natural. I mean, with the spirit of the Olympics, which is about discipline, but also, in a way, it transits into the parkour, which is really about being very athletic, and there's a whole discipline behind that, and that hasn't been translated into an Olympic specific category. But at least there was this nod that it's not just about video games, as you mentioned. It's much more than that, and I felt like it was the right tone.
Definitely. And I think the kind of parkour is such an incredible way to see the city and to see architecture and all of that. And it felt like, because that's one of the reasons why the games are so popular, and that this ability to kind of clamber and athletically just navigate in ways that a lot of people can't. And kind of, it was almost like, what, that works really well in the game. Why don't we show off Paris and by doing that a bit in real life?
Exactly. And in the documentary, what is very interesting is that they were showing these sketches where they had their hooded character walking over Notre Dame and the roof. So I wish we had seen that, but obviously it wasn't possible at that time. But as you mentioned, it's just like having this skyline being so high and vertical. I think are both features that well illustrate the city and serve the purpose of our video game series.
And France itself has a kind of a long history of video game development. Anybody who looks at the history of video games, France comes up a lot, particularly in kind of, well, big companies like Ubisoft, but then also a kind of really thriving indie scene from quite early on in video game development. And video games are classified as art by the government. And in 2006, inducted 3 game designers into the, and this is where I'm going to really mess this up, I apologize. They inducted 3 game designers into the Ordre des Arts et des Lettres. I'm so sorry. And, you know, these things alongside the Olympics opening ceremony, you know, what do you think this more kind of official recognition gives to games?
It's so much. I mean, it starts with universities. It's part of everything. I think a sense of belonging, of embracing that new products can be created. But I think it's normal also. This transition is normal, and it was the same for cinema. If we go, you know, back 100 years, I think it's something that is novel, that is changing, also affects the way that we perceive ourselves. But as with what you're mentioning, with this nice recognition, I think it's a starting point that I feel we'll see more and more in the upcoming years.
I think the classification as art is a really important one, because I think sometimes video games have a bit of an identity crisis, or at least a perception crisis, in that they are at once kind of tech, hobby, you know, quote unquote toy, and actually, I mean, I don't want to speak for other people, but I feel like art is actually, for me at least, much more where video games lie. Yes, they can be all these things, but they're art. And I remember when I was a journalist kind of 10 years ago, and it was a big deal when video game coverage moved from the tech section to the arts and culture section. And, you know, that sounds like a kind of, oh, it's just, you know, it's just moving one place. Does it really change? But it does have a huge impact, because it means how you can cover something and what you cover actually changes at that point, because you don't have to have a kind of tech spin on it. You can talk about them as, you know, artistic artifacts and all these things. And so, yeah, it's, you know, I kind of hope that more governments will take you from France and be like, no, these things are art. That's, yeah.
It's ongoing, and I appreciate the way that you phrase it. It's the tech is the mean to an end. I mean, it's the canvas, it's the tool that we're using to produce it, which makes it digital, for instance. But ultimately, it can lead to so many different things. Like encompassing all video games into one category is for sure a difficult way to actually embrace all of its complexity. I mean, if we think about other forms of art, it can produce absolutely lavish results, and at the same time, it can produce, you know, quality that maybe is not as great. And so, video games they're also a reflection of our societies, what we are hoping for, what we're striving for. There are so many great narrative opportunities. I think there are a lot of great cultural and historical representations that can be shown through video games. It can be felt and make people interested in the past and change their perspective of history or culture. I think it's tremendous, and yeah, so an art is a form. It's a tool. It's a mean to an end. It's a medium. But there's so many ways to achieve a video game ultimately.
And I think, you know, this is a minor soapbox for me, but with the kind of classification of something as art as well, from someone who is both a creator and an academic, something I think a lot of people don't realize of stuff like this is it has very material, tangible effects on creators. You know, if something is classified a certain way, it means you can access grants, you can apply for certain things, and so you get this kind of much more you know, it's not just about this kind of more general cultural awareness and acceptance. It's also about enabling creators in certain spaces. And so I think that's, you know, a really important and great thing.
It makes me go in a totally different direction. But when we mentioned this, I was thinking about how the fact that AC Unity didn't have a photo mode when it was released. But ever since, people have been modding Assassin's Creed Unity in so many ways, and some of them have created photo modes for the game. And the reason why I bring this up is that I think photo mode is a great illustration of how people can use video games in so many different ways. And And so there's this one of these content creator, Memento Gallery, who's been taking pictures ever since the game has been released in Assassin's Creed Unity, and trying to show the depth behind the light work that has been done, the textures, the compositions that have been created for Assassin's Creed Unity. And it's the same with a lot of Assassin's Creed games that have since embraced photo mode as a tool in the game. But I think in a broader sense for video games at large, so many of them now have photo modes, and a lot of players actually indulge in taking pictures. I know I'm one of those. Like, probably half of my playtime on Assassin's Creed Valhalla is just taking pictures. And because I already knew the story, of course, but you can have this opportunity, and compared to real life, well, there's no pressure to take the picture. You can just wait for the right lighting, and you're at the right place. So yeah, it's even an additional subset of art that I don't think was meant originally, but it's there now.
I mean, it's so interesting. I could talk about this for so long, because I find it one of the things I found playing the game, because there's always something going back to an older game, and particularly with Unity, there was a real emphasis on multiplayer. And so I kind of went back and thought, okay, I'll be able, I'll play the game, obviously. I probably won't be able to do the kind of multiplayer missions. But that's not true. I did the multiplayer missions because there was people playing online. In fact, I have to, whoever, I think they were called like Badger Fluff or something was their gamer tag. But thank you for for very much carrying me through the multiplayer missions. And I just thought the kind of life that these games have way longer after they come out is really interesting. And I think one way of looking at that is also, we probably have to bring up the game really coming back into focus and back into the kind of cultural imagination after the tragic burning of Notre Dame. A lot of people were bringing up Unity's very spectacular recreation of the cathedral, although I think there has been a bit of confusion about about Notre Dame and Unity and all of this, because I know it seemed, watching it unfold in real time, people were bringing up, there was a real emotional resonance with the depiction of Notre Dame in the game, and then people saying, oh, it's it's so wonderful, and then it became, it could be used for this, and then it became, it has been used for this, and it kind of snowballed from there. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about Notre Dame and Unity, and yeah.
Oh, I remember that day so well. I couldn't believe the fire was happening. Of course, when that kind of event unfolds, you need to take a few seconds, few minutes, maybe more, to acknowledge that it's happening for real. And so after the burning, it has been crazy to see that within 2 days, fans were turning to Assassin's Creed Unity, and medias were turning their attention to Assassin's Creed Unity back again. I mean, forcing Ubisoft to open the channels again for people to download the game. It was the biggest moment where people were starting to download the game video again, and so it just showed the lasting legacy of that. But so the question is, did Ubisoft play a part in the recreation of Notre Dame? Yes, but it's not the one that I think most people think it is. So yes, the common saying was within the days after the fire was that Ubisoft could provide the 3D model for the city or builders to start it over again. Well, of course, they didn't need us, because we didn't need them to build the monument in the 3D space. We just we could rely on archives, pictures, videos, and specialty books. But Ubisoft did play many parts actually in the rebuilding in different ways. So one of them, of course, was to pledge for funding. So I think Ubisoft provided €500,000 for the rebuild itself. So that was, that's useful. And then on the side of that, so they made the game free of access at that point, which also led to it had become very popular again, and people falling in love with the game and realizing that it was actually a very good game and beautiful. And then there are two more components. One is that, so there's a crypt underneath Notre Dame, which is a museum for the building itself. And so Ubisoft provided 180 degrees videos that people could go and see while the building was under reconstruction. So really, helping to keep it alive, because all of these, flocks of tourists usually go to Paris, the most visited city in the world, and they want to see Notre Dame, and they couldn't. So instead, they could go at least to the crypt and have a sense of the building. And then the last part is a VR project that we released, I think, 2 years ago. It was an association with a movie that was made by Jean-Jacques Hano, famously known for the Name of the Rose with Sean Connery. But so he made a movie that's called Notre Dame Brûle. So it's really about the story of the firefighters on the day of the burning, who had the big challenge of trying to save as much as possible from the building. And so we created a VR game that's associated specifically with that movie. So that's the short and long story of
it's good to get clarification.
What happened after. Yeah, so and even to this day, it's still something that's very important for us.
Of course, it's nice to see this kind of, it's not just a one-way street of this thing inspired and this game's created. It's kind of much more of an interplay, kind of back and forth between the two, which is really lovely to see. I think it's also really interesting because the Notre Dame depicted in Unity is not the Notre Dame that would have existed at the time. It's close to the kind of 1859 restoration of Notre Dame, which is the Notre Dame that we would recognize. And so I thought it was just this really interesting aspect of, these. There's a, even though there's not a kind of, I loathe to use the term accuracy, quote unquote, but there's an emotional truth, I guess, to it. When the game was first developed, that was obviously a decision that was made. With we thought, okay, well, I don't want to put words in mouths. Why choose that? But I guess because it's iconic and it's recognizable. It's what players will want to see. It's what we want to give players. And then later on, it relives this emotional truth again with people going back to that. I just thought was a really interesting kind of reflection on history and memory happening.
Well, so the history of that Notre Dame's representation in the game itself is it would be a good book of history. It could be a very lengthy book. So the basic information is that during the French Revolution, which it starts in 1789, officially ends in 1794. There was a spire on the building that was there before. That was had been there for a while, and it fell or was deconstructed during the French Revolution, probably reusing a bit of the lead that was in the spire to make bullets for the cause of the French Revolution itself. And so we had that information in mind. We knew as game developers that the spire was gone, and so there was this big question of like. It's an iconic piece of the actual landmark, which was, as you mentioned, created with the plans of Viollet-le-Duc in 1859. And so we really had that big question of like, what are we gonna show? The old spire, the new spire, spireless. And so we tested these versions with players, and they could not recognize the monument without the spire. So that was part of the process. Of course, as a historian, I was like, no, let's go with the more accurate stuff as usual, which is my stance. But I had really understood very well the constraint here and the fact that this monument is so well known internationally today for people. And so there's the spire. There are some of these gargoyles, the friges that are over the monuments that really are more iconic of the 19th century version, second half of the 19th century version of the monument. And then there's the interior part of Notre Dame also, which we had a lot of complexity because during the French Revolution, the monument was used in different ways. It was used at first to show this new royal monarchy that could be maybe a democracy or some sort. Then it became a temple for reason, a warehouse for wine and for cannons and so on. So the way the building evolved through the French Revolution really changed a lot. But in the game, it was a non-persistent perspective that we were showing, and so we had to make a decision of exactly what we were going to show. And so what we decided to illustrate for the whole Ile de la Cité, so for the whole island, downtown Paris, and the monument itself, was that the clergy was still there, but it was trying to be very quiet. Because some priests had been sentenced already to execution, and so that's the kind of vibe that we kept for the monument. It's in the game. It's half a warehouse, half a church still, but it's not this huge cathedral that it used to be, this royal cathedral that was the central piece of the city politically. So all of these it's a lot of questions, and because it's as you mentioned when we just started this podcast, Paris is really the main character of this game ultimately, and Notre Dame is probably this big nose representing this character. It's like so iconic. So all of these were very big topics to discuss, and ultimately we decided to go with the version where the spire is there, the fire that was there until very recently in 2019, and which is also the highest point in the city of Paris in Assassin's Creed Unity.
I'm so interested to hear that you actually had the 3 versions and tested them, because my assumption would be is kind of, okay, we put the spire in, but it's fascinating to hear that players struggle to locate themselves or struggle to recognize where they were, or, without that. Yeah, that is so interesting to me.
It was maybe sometimes more difficult to point that out until 2019. Of course, we have pictures actually of before 1859 of the actual monument, and we can see how different it is, unrecognizable. But after the launch of the game, I was telling this story, but ever since the burning, I think a lot of people understood much better the perspective of having it spireless.
Yeah, and so it's a really powerful thing. I think that emotional resonance, but then the emotional resonance also matching with the game development practicality of needing a high point, needing players to locate themselves, is a really interesting mixture of public history and memory meeting game design.
It is, and maybe last bit on Notre Dame is that it was our first landmark that we were doing 1-to-1 scale. So it's the real size of the monument. Of course, there are some adaptations for the character to be able to navigate with some textures and placement. Statues are not all unique. They're generic statues and patterns that are repeated over and over, and we kind of go everywhere. But the other prowess was that it was the first time that we could climb over and go in and out seamlessly. If we compare it to the Assassin's Creed games that had preceded Assassin's Creed Unity. So it was, in all ways, it was a very iconic element for us. And the artist that mainly worked on this, Caroline Mius, who's now an associate art director at Ubisoft Montreal, she spent her whole time on the project on Assassin's Creed Unity trying to rebuild it. So it was, and she had never set foot in the monument before.
Wow, that is a true labor of love. It is. Wow. I mean, even just, you clarified the kind of, Ubisoft's involvement in Notre Dame, but I do think it's telling that people very quickly were like, yeah, of course it's being used. Of course it's, it is what it is. And I think that in itself is incredibly telling. So now we're just going to move on to kind of what was learned from making this game. So this can be kind of, on a personal level, both from learning about the setting or, what you learned during the development process.
I know from a team perspective, it was a huge endeavor to try and make Assassin's Creed Unity. We were extremely ambitious. I think we learned a lot from that, from the processes of, because we had never created something that was as big, as tall. Also with these, most buildings have 5 stories high, and where the maximum that we had really reached before was maybe 2, sometimes 3, and in different representations, a lot of wilderness, and where here everything was concentrated. So I think we learned a lot through that process, and results showed very much for what followed with the Assassin's Creed Syndicate, for instance, which I think they learned a lot from our production process. On a personal note, I'd say it was hard. It was hard. I think I learned more about game making process. It hadn't been my first game at Ubisoft, but to work on something that was this big, I think it really made me think that I should help teams not so much into giving them individual answers, but trying to provide them with tools to do their own research more and more. Because I came from Assassin's Creed 3, and it was a role in which I could really follow up with every detail. And with Assassin's Creed Unity, I had become so huge that it made me really realize that it's better to empower team members to better do their research themselves and find the right consultants to support them than trying to do everything by myself, which made no sense at all.
That would be a huge ask. You'd be endlessly answering questions, but really interesting, I think, because you see that now with Assassin's Creed, this kind of holistic view of integrating history into the development process. So it's really interesting to hear potentially where that came from. It's that, you deal with something so enormous that, one person cannot cover all of this.
No, but in a way, you see, it's I've always been very cautious and wary about the results of working with history and representing history. And the crazy part with, everything that happened with Notre Dame burning afterwards and so on is just proof that it was always worth it to put all these efforts and, these headaches of trying to represent the past and trying to find a good fit with entertainment and make it a compelling product. But I think it just proved that it's really worth putting all the efforts.
Yeah, it's a really powerful reminder. So we're going to end with our quickfire questions. Now, again, I very much realize this game is not new. It is. I may be asking you to delve deep in your memories. So if you can't answer, that is quite all right. But we're doing it for all the games, so it would be only fair to do it for this one too. Okay, so we're going to start with, what is your favorite character in the game?
Mirabeau. And I mentioned him before because I like how he's a good representation of the past, like of this time period where everything is political, complex, not always what it seems. So I really liked that how they represented it, and also his skin. He was not known for not having a really nice skin, and I appreciate that they could represent him as someone that has charisma without being beautiful.
Oh, that is a great answer. Very good answer. Okay, so we're going to move on to, what is your favorite viewpoint or location?
The Pantheon, because that's lower right next to the Sorbonne, close to your north. You have Notre Dame. You have the rest of the city. I think it's really beautiful. You can see the whole place.
Do you have a favorite detail, no matter how tiny?
I love that we have the street names in the city. Like, the layout is not perfect, but because the scale changes depending on where you're at in the city. But there are these streets. Many have the same name, that are called Nicolas Guérin, and that was the level design director. And so for the fictive streets that we had in the game, his name is there.
That is a great detail. And another great answer. You're doing very well, Maxime.
Thank you.
Okay, last one.
It's a lot of pressure, but yeah.
Last one. Do you think there's something that players might miss when playing that you think they should find or do or pay attention to?
Songs, I think. You have a lot of these songs in the city itself, and I think it's a real nice detail.
No, that is a great detail. I have a friend of mine is a historian who specializes in music and soundscapes, and so kind of this idea, and particularly something like a revolution, when you have all these very iconic songs, you have all of that. It is a really lovely. So yeah, listen, players, when you play the game. Don't
Exactly.
just play.
The solidarity, the sense of crowd. I think it's in there, so it's beautiful.
Well, you did it, Maxime. You gave fantastic answers for all of those. Well done. The pressure is off. You did it.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for joining us.
It was so lovely, and great memories again, and it makes me wonder, maybe I should pop the disc back in the console and have a playthrough for myself.
Yeah, if you play, say hello to Badger Fluff, who will take you through the the multiplayer parts of it very well. He looked after me.
Oh, thank you. I'll make sure to say hi.
Thank you, Maxime.
Thanks for watching Echoes of History. If you enjoyed this video and want to learn more about the real history behind the Assassin's Creed games, then subscribe for more episodes. You can check out the extended interviews wherever you get your podcasts by clicking the link in the description. You should also hit the links that are floating on the screen somewhere. Are they on my face? They're on my face again, aren't they? Get them off. Follow a link, please.